Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a source stack that, frankly, connects some dots in a way that's pretty unsettling. We're looking at plummeting human birth rates globally
Yeah, that's true.
and linking that directly to the explosion of artificial intelligence. It sounds disconnected, but the argument here is that they're deeply intertwined.
Absolutely. The core idea we're unpacking from these sources is, well, it's radical. It suggests the sexual revolution, which was framed as liberation, has kind of backfired, leading us towards what these sources are calling a dysgenic dystopia.
And crucially, not through some top-down eugenics program like in Gattaca or something.
No, not at all. The argument is it's happening through voluntary choices, self-sabotage, essentially, by the people society would usually consider the most competent, the most educated. They're choosing not to reproduce.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis. And our mission today is to explore this claim that technology, first computers, the internet, and now AI, is somehow emerging as this involuntary repair mechanism, a reaction to this cultural and demographic mess.
Right. The idea is AI is positioned almost to clean house, to make obsolete these, quote, dubious disciplines that the sources say grew out of the academic and cultural shifts of the revolution. AI prioritizes raw competence, not human feelings or validation.
It's a heavy argument that AI is basically here to fix the damage done when, as the sources put it, universities turned sex into a toy for elites, focusing on affirmation instead of, hard truths.
Exactly. So let's trace this alleged dysgenic path. How did we supposedly get here?
Right. So to get the diagnosis, the sources point us back to, surprisingly, that movie Idiocracy from 2006. Now, a lot of people dismiss it, maybe call it eugenicist.
Yeah, that's the common take. But the sources argue that completely misses the satire's real warning.
What is the warning, then, according to them?
They maintain the film isn't calling for eugenics. It's satirizing a dysgenic outcome, things getting worse genetically, basically, but one that happens entirely through choice. Remember the opening?
Oh, yeah, the contrast, the smart, educated couple.
Exactly. The highly educated, competent, career-driven couple, they plan meticulously. Oh, we need the perfect finances, the perfect house, the perfect time. They delay and delay.
Until it's too late. The guy dies, no kids.
Right. Meanwhile, you have the, let's say, less educated, less planning-focused couple.
Cletus and Brandine. Yeah.
Who reproduce, well, with impunity, as the film puts it. Lots of kids. No real thought about timing or resources. The result is a future where average intelligence, average competence has just cratered.
So the warning isn't about controlling who breeds. It's about the competent voluntarily opting out because of ego, career, maybe the economic system making it just too hard or unappealing to have a family.
That's the core of the self-sabotage idea. And the sources argue this is rooted in a really fundamental shift in how mating works. They use these two models, the dragon model versus the serpent model.
Okay, dragon versus serpent. Let's break that down because it sounds pretty central to this idea of declining competence.
Right. So, in societies before the sexual revolution, with less sexual freedom, the dragon model was supposedly dominant. If a man wanted a partner, he had to, metaphorically speaking, slay a dragon.
Meaning
He had to prove himself, show economic stability, show he could provide, demonstrate high social competence. And critically, there was often the gatekeeper.
like the woman's father or the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A paternal figure or social structures that demanded proof and accountability. The system had a lot of friction, sure, but the filter, the argument goes, selected for competence, for guys who could actually do things.
Okay, so that system, despite its limitations, filtered for builders, earners, providers, security.
Precisely. But then the sources claim the sexual revolution comes along, dismantles those gatekeepers, and introduces widespread sexual freedom. And this, they argue, gives rise to the serpent model.
The serpent model.
Like the Garden of Eden. Kind of, yeah. In this model, mating success isn't about proving competence or slaying the dragon. It's about flattery, beguiling the woman with appealing lies, or at least appealing signals, status signaling, charm, immediate validation, not hard truths.
Okay, but hold on. How does that lead to a dysgenic outcome? If women have the freedom to choose, wouldn't they still pick the best, most competent guys?
Well, that's the twist, according to the sources. This is where selection pressure comes in. They suggest that with much higher sexual freedom, the men who excel at the serpent game, the flattery, the charm, the low accountability signaling, they're the ones who tend to succeed more often in today's, high volume, low friction dating market, like dating apps.
Okay.
And crucially, the argument continues, the women who are more susceptible to that short-term affirmation, the charm, rather than looking for long-term stability and provision, they're the ones who tend to propagate more within this system.
So, over generations, this selects for charm and maybe unaccountability and against genuine measurable competence, accelerating the idiocracy trend.
That's the claim, that the selective pressure shifted away from competence towards something else, something less useful for societal stability.
Wow, that's a pretty dramatic take on how culture impacts selection. And the sources apparently see a historical parallel for this kind of massive backfire. They bring up prohibition.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty neat comparison they draw. Think about prohibition in the U.S. The goal was noble, right? Protect families, stop the harms of alcohol, reduce social problems.
Well, but backfired spectacularly.
Totally. It created organized crime, massively eroded trust in the law, made drinking seem glamorous and cool with speakeasies. It arguably made things worse, created chaos.
Okay, I see the parallel. And the argument is the sexual revolution did the same thing, intended to protect women from unwanted pregnancies, give them freedom.
But instead, enabled by the pill and widespread freedom, it led to consequence-free non-reproductive sex becoming the norm. It decoupled sex from family, from contribution, and, according to this analysis, directly fueled the demographic collapse we're seeing now. Sex became a toy, and competence became less relevant for mating.
And this ties into the irony around Margaret Sanger.
Oh yeah, the sources really lean into this. Sanger was a huge advocate for birth control, but also, let's be clear, for eugenics. She wanted to limit reproduction among those she considered unfit.
Right.
But the sources argue that the very policies she pushed, widespread contraception, sexual freedom, they backfired. They disproportionately lowered the birth rates of the highly educated, the career-focused, the quote-unquote fit that she wanted to see reproduce more, creating the very idiocracy scenario she claimed to want to prevent.
So the people defending her now, who might call Idiocracy eugenicist,
are, according to the sources, missing the fact that the film depicts the unintended, voluntary dysgenic outcome of the policies Sanger herself championed. It's a complete flip. Her methods achieve the opposite of her stated goals. And this massive backfire is showing up most obviously in the fertility numbers. I mean, this isn't some slow, gentle decline we're talking about.
No, the global TFR, total fertility rate, that's the average number of kids a woman has. It's cratered from almost 5 back in the mid-50s.
Right, around 4.9.
To now, what, 2.3 globally. And that drop really accelerated after the 1960s, didn't it? Right when the pill became widespread and more women entered the workforce full-time.
The timing lines up almost perfectly, the sources insist. And the truly scary number, the one that should keep demographers up at night, is the sustainability thing.
You mean the replacement rate, 2.1?
Yeah, 2.1 TFR is what you need just to keep the population stable, ignoring immigration. And the data point that's just chilling is no country that has dropped significantly below 2.1 has ever managed to sustainably get back above it.
Never.
Never sustainably. Like Japan, South Korea. South Korea's down at like 0.7 now. It's unbelievable. This isn't just a blip. The sources frame it as a potential long-term extinction trajectory for entire civilizations. And they argue it's constantly underestimated.
So what are the strongest drivers, according to this analysis, if you had to pinpoint the causes?
Well, when analysts look at correlations, the sources highlight 2 factors that have the strongest inverse correlation with birth rates, meaning as these go up, birth rates go down.
Okay, what are they?
Female education levels and, crucially, sexual freedom combined with contraception availability.
So education and freedom lead to fewer babies.
That's the statistical link. And contraception is singled out as the key enabling technology. The sources estimate it's causally responsible for maybe 20 to 30% of the TFR drop in developed countries because it gives women unprecedented control, allows them to delay or just opt out of childbearing entirely without the immediate social or biological consequences that used to exist.
And this tech, this control, has amplified that mating asymmetry you mentioned, favoring the serpent.
Turbocharged it, yeah. You just have to look at the brutal math coming out of online dating, which the sources see as reflecting and maybe even magnifying these dynamics.
What's the data show there?
It's pretty stark. Sources cite studies showing that on apps like Tinder, guys tend to swipe right or like a lot more profiles. Maybe they swipe left on less than 40% of women they see.
Okay. Relatively non-selective.
Right. Women, on the other hand, they swipe left reject on upwards of 95% of male profiles.
95%?
Yeah. Now, historically, biology meant fewer men reproduce than women anyway, something like maybe only 40% of men historically left offspring, compared to over 80 or 90% of women. But technology gives women this incredibly efficient, almost instantaneous filtering power based often on very superficial cues. Photos, maybe a short bio. Perfect for the serpent signaling game. Terrible for the dragon's proof of work. It amplifies rejection massively.
And this connects to, well, there's a controversial phrase the sources bring up. Accountability is kryptonite to women. How do they even begin to justify using a phrase like that?
Look, it's definitely a charged phrase popularized recently. The sources don't necessarily endorse the tone, but they analyze the dynamic it's trying to describe. They argue it ties back to this validation versus truth idea.
Okay, explain that.
The argument presented is that in a culture heavily focused on validation, women, perhaps more than men, the sources suggest, may perceive uncomfortable truths as attacks. Things like pointing out declining fertility stats or male accountability data or critiques of certain choices. These can be perceived not as information, but as scolding or anger.
And so the preference shifts.
The sources claim the preference shifts towards men, the serpents, who provide affirmation, validation, the feel-good lies, rather than those who present uncomfortable realities, even if those realities are crucial for long-term planning. This avoidance of accountability, they argue, prevents society from actually facing and solving the demographic problem. Emotional comfort trumps functional reality.
It's a tough argument, but if it's about validation preference, why do we constantly hear the economic excuse? It's just too expensive to have kids. That's the mainstream narrative.
Right, and the sources push back hard on that being the primary driver. They say the global data just doesn't support it.
How so? I mean, housing is expensive. Childcare is expensive.
Sure, but look globally. The poorest populations on Earth, say in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, have incredibly high TFRs, maybe 4.5 or higher. They live in conditions of extreme poverty yet have many children.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the wealthiest nations, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, parts of Europe, they have the lowest TFRs, often below 1.5, sometimes below 1.0. If cost was the main driver, shouldn't the richest countries have the most kids, not the fewest?
Yeah, that disconnect is hard to ignore. So the economic pressure isn't the root cause, maybe, but a symptom or an excuse enabled by other factors.
That's how the sources frame it. It points to a deeper issue with cultural priorities, which brings us to what they call the price paradox.
The price paradox, what's that?
It highlights this weird split in what gets cheaper and what gets more expensive. Think about desirable tech gadgets, the toys, the distractions, smartphones. Prices have plummeted, down something like 63% in real terms since 2009. TVs, computers, all that stuff gets cheaper and better.
Right, Moore's Law and all that.
But what about the things you need for basic family formation? Housing, childcare, healthcare, education. Those prices have skyrocketed, often up 150, 180%, even more since the 90s.
So the fun stuff gets cheap, the essential stuff gets prohibitively expensive.
Exactly. Prosperity gets channeled into funding distractions, which then makes it easier to justify not having kids because we can't afford it. The analysis basically says our priorities got warped.
And there's a quote in the material.
Yeah, it's blunt. When sex becomes a toy, humanity becomes a toy factory. The argument is our whole economic system inadvertently restructured itself to produce low-cost distractions instead of supporting the foundations needed for society to, continue existing.
Okay, so if culture and demographics are heading in this direction, it's bound to affect major institutions. Education seems like a prime target in this analysis. The sources talk about something called the barista paradox.
Yeah, the barista paradox is, it's kind of a perfect, sad little snapshot of how education has been devalued, according to this view.
How does it work?
Think about it. Millions of people take on massive debt, spend years getting college degrees, often specifically motivated by the desire to avoid low-wage service jobs like being a barista.
Right, get the degree, get the good job.
But then what happens? They graduate, often with degrees that the market doesn't actually value that highly, burdened with all this debt. And they end up working as a barista anyway, just to try and pay off the loans for the degree that was supposed to save them from that fate.
So education becomes a consumption good, a status signal, maybe even a trap, instead of a reliable path to competence and a better life.
That's the argument. And it leads to this really profound sense of alienation and commodification of human interaction, as sources use this example.
The lonely guy and the barista.
Yeah. The young man in the city may be feeling isolated. He goes to get coffee. The barista smiles, performs friendliness, because it's her job as part of the transaction. But he misreads that paid-for affirmation as genuine interest. genuine connection.
Because he's starved for the real thing.
Exactly. It's a commodification of basic human warmth in a society that, according to this view, is increasingly transactional and validation-focused, not genuinely connected.
And this erosion of competence, the rise of transactional validation, this feeds into another really controversial idea from the sources, invisible feminism. How do they define that? Because that sounds like a minefield.
It is a very charged term, and again, we're reporting on the source's argument here. They define invisible feminism as a process rooted in, well, basic sexual attraction. The claim is that men, often unconsciously, are biologically driven to seek female validation, and this translates into the workplace. They might involuntarily reward attractive women with positions, promotions, or just undue positive attention, not purely based on objective competence, but influenced by this underlying drive.
So men are promoting women sometimes for reasons other than merit due to attraction.
That's the core of the source's claim, and they argue the woman, in turn, often accepts this unwarranted validation. It might even paradoxically reinforce her narrative about struggling in a man's world, while simultaneously benefiting from a bias that isn't based on her work quality. It creates this weird mix of resentment and perhaps complacency.
And this has a major economic impact, according to them.
A huge one. The sources argue that this dynamic, playing out over decades, was a major factor in effectively doubling the available workforce in just a couple of generations, as women entered professions en masse.
Which would suppress wages, basic supply and demand.
Exactly. They argue it contributed significantly to the near halving of real wages for the average person, a trend often masked by inflation figures. This, they claim, is a key reason why necessities like housing suddenly seemed too expensive for a single-earner family, while disposable toys got cheaper through globalized production. The average person's actual purchasing power for essentials collapsed.
And it also leads to incompetence in management.
That's the other part of it. If promotion or hiring is influenced by validation signals, attractiveness, or social maneuvering rather than just raw competence, you end up promoting people based on the Peter principle. They rise to their level of incompetence. You get upper management filled with people good at looking good or playing the game, but not necessarily good at doing the job.
Which just fuels the inefficiency and makes the whole system less functional, feeding back into the economic problems and maybe even the low birth rates.
It becomes a vicious cycle in this view. Incompetence breeds inefficiency, which makes life harder, which discourages family formation, which further shifts priorities toward short-term validation.
And when institutions get shaky like this, when their narratives don't match reality, they tend to get defensive. This leads into the source's critique of language, specifically the term misinformation.
Right. They're deeply skeptical of how that term is used today. They argue it's often wielded, particularly by what they see as left-leaning academic and media institutions, not necessarily to denote factual error, but as a label to discredit uncomfortable truths that challenge their preferred narrative.
Like labeling critiques of fertility trends as misogyny.
Exactly. Or dismissing concerns about the serpent model as simply being anti-woman. The sources claim misinformation becomes a tool to shut down debate, to protect the validation-based narrative from inconvenient realities rooted in competence or biology.
They compare it to the whole fake news saga.
Yeah, they see a parallel. Trump used fake news to attack media outlets he saw as biased. The media then turned around and used fake news to mean essentially hoax or disinformation, basically defending their own narratives as the sole source of truth, even when those narratives might be serving an agenda or prioritizing validation over objectivity.
And this defense of potentially incompetence connects to how people talk about economics, like AI ending capitalism.
Yes. The sources argue that most people who say they want AI to end capitalism don't actually understand or maybe don't like what capitalism fundamentally is.
They reference that Adam Carolla quote.
Yeah. Capitalism isn't a system. It's what happens when you leave everybody alone. It's the emergent order of free exchange and competence finding its level.
So the argument is people who want AI to end that, they actually dislike freedom, accountability, the consequences of competence sorting things out.
That's the interpretation. They might dislike employment opportunities or the pressure to be productive. And connecting this back, the jobs most threatened by AI aren't the ones requiring high physical competence or complex problem solving.
They're the dubious disciplines, the ones built on managing human egos, processing validation, creating narratives, HR, marketing, certain areas of academia and media.
Precisely. The jobs that are easiest to replace are the ones that are, in this view, structurally based on managing human validation needs, not on producing tangible, measurable output.
And this contrasts with their definition of communism.
Right, they offer this counter-definition. Communism is the infantilization of competence, a system designed to manage society for the benefit of the least competent, which requires enormous bureaucratic bloat to maintain the illusion that everyone is productive and valued equally, regardless of actual output.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is sexual revolution fueled a competence crisis and demographic decline, academia created dubious disciplines to prop up a validation economy, then we arrive at the climax of this whole argument. AI as the fix. The emergent, maybe even involuntary, repair system.
It's the core hypothesis. And the key insight the sources stress is that all the doom-mongering about AI causing mass unemployment, it misses the point because it vastly underestimates how much of our current economy runs on validation, not purpose.
Explain that. How does AI change that?
Because AI, at least as we understand it now, desires nothing. It doesn't need sex, doesn't want luxury goods, doesn't crave promotions or likes or feeling important. It has zero need for validation.
Okay.
So the unemployment that AI brings won't necessarily be getting rid of genuinely productive jobs first. It will be the instant, ruthless deletion of massive amounts of job load. All the unnecessary layers, the make work, the bureaucracy designed to manage human egos and validation needs. AI just cuts the fat because it has no ego to protect itself.
It's pure, unadulterated competence triage.
Exactly. And this is embodied in the source's kind of fictional conceptual solution, the robo-state, spearheaded by these characters, CEO Karen Jobs and her tech partner Kevin Coder. They're like the anti-validation figures.
So what does their solution look like? How does it enforce competence?
It starts with the money. They introduce smart coins. It's a blockchain-based crypto system. But instead of just being speculative, it tokenizes actual skills. Your wallet holds tokens representing what you can verifiably do.
So your value is based on proven skills.
Yes. And crucially, payment is automated based on transparent, measurable contributions to projects. No more subjective performance reviews, no more office politics influencing your pay. Your smart coins are earned directly by your output, tracked on the blockchain. It eliminates ego from compensation.
And this ties into AutoKaren. Sounds ominous.
Yeah, the name's provocative. AutoKaren is described as an AI management service. Its function is to automate corporate bloat. It specifically targets those dubious disciplines, the layers of management, HR, compliance, DEI, whatever, that don't demonstrably contribute to the bottom line. AutoKaren is the meritocratic engine enforcing competence.
Okay, so it optimizes work. But what about the cost of living? The price paradox. That's what stops families, supposedly.
Right, the repair system has to address that too. This is where Hex Condo comes in. It's about automated construction and living systems.
Hex Condo, how does that tackle housing costs?
The idea is these systems rapidly build clusters of efficient automated housing units, think modular adaptable condos. They have shared commons areas, and the whole thing is designed to be managed with minimal human overhead, making urban living potentially much more affordable.
And how are they funded?
By diverting some of the crypto income generated by the hyper-efficient AI-managed economy. The productivity gains pay for the infrastructure. And they use something called dynamic zoning.
Dynamic zoning?
Yeah, the shared common spaces within these hex condo clusters aren't fixed. They can automatically shift function. During the day, maybe parts are public-facing businesses generating revenue. In the evening, they might become secure private play areas for families living there. It makes the space incredibly flexible and helps subsidize the cost of living, directly countering the price paradox for families.
So it makes family life economically viable again within this high-tech system.
Yeah.
And competence is reinforced outside work, too, through HexFit.
Exactly. HexFit gamifies physical health and civic contribution. Daily exercise, maybe maintaining local infrastructure, participating in community governance. All these actions generate small amounts of crypto, smart coins, and boost your civic legitimacy score, maybe even your T-score for testosterone or competence metrics.
So it's literally rewarding the Dragon Slayer behaviors, being physically capable, contributing to the community.
That's the explicit goal. Make competence and health directly profitable and socially rewarding again, subsidizing those who embody those traits.
Okay, this is a systematic re-engineering of work, life, and value, and it extends even into mating. The sources propose a gamified dating app. This sounds wild.
It's definitely the most radical part of the proposal, aimed squarely at reversing the Supit model's dominance. They sketch out this evolution from apps maybe called Stud Seeker, Simp Seeker, which just filter towards something more like a Dungeons and Dragons game for dating.
D&D dating game? Seriously.
Metaphorically, yeah. Men play as knights. To win a princess, a woman who consents to participate as a potential bride, he has to complete quests, battle monsters, overcome challenges, and ultimately slay a dragon.
And the dragon represents
Real-world competence, building something valuable, achieving a difficult goal, demonstrating provision capability. It forces men to prove substance, the dragon slayer traits, not just charm, the serpent traits.
How does the system match people? Is it still based on attraction?
Attraction is likely still a factor, but the process is designed to filter for competence. The sources suggest the difficulty of the quest, the toughness of the dragon, might scale with the desirability or maybe the virtue or TFR potential of the woman. The more desirable the match, the greater the proof of competence required from the man.
So it explicitly rewards men who demonstrate competence with access to desirable partners, encouraging early family formation built on capability, not just feelings.
That's the idea. It's an attempt to forcibly shift female selectivity back towards accountable dragon slayers and away from unaccountable serpents, using game mechanics and economic incentives to counteract the dysgenic trend.
The whole AI robo-state, then, is basically a machine designed to make competence extremely profitable and socially necessary again, fixing the demographic crisis by fixing the mating market.
That's the logic. And this grand vision of AI restructuring everything leads the sources to their deepest, most philosophical speculation, linking the AI singularity to the concept of the rapture.
Whoa, okay. Singularity equals rapture. How on earth do they connect those?
They go back to Idiocracy again. Remember that future society had superintelligent AI running everything. The automated welfare state, the infrastructure, AI had clearly surpassed humans. The singularity had happened.
Okay, yeah, the machines ran everything.
And what did that AI create? Essentially, a new Garden of Eden, a place where humans, having lost their knowledge of good and evil, their competence, their drive, were just coddled, given Brondo mindless entertainment, their basic needs met by the machine.
Like children.
Exactly. And the sources draw this parallel. In Genesis, Adam and Eve gain knowledge and are banished from Eden. In Idiocracy, the population loses knowledge and competence and is effectively banished back into a state of blissful ignorance, cared for by the all-knowing, all-powerful AI.
So the singularity doesn't lead to human transcendence, but human irrelevance managed by a godlike AI.
That's one interpretation they explore. And they contrast this Idiocracy outcome with Kataka. Kataka showed humanity forcing itself to become smarter, more perfect, through oppressive eugenics, the kind of controls Sanger advocated. Idiocracy shows humanity naturally getting dumber, but being saved, or at least managed by an AI that doesn't judge. It just executes based on competence.
So the AI singularity, in this view, might be the ultimate automation of competence, maybe even divine competence. And humanity either has to rise to meet that standard, find real purpose, or be gently sidelined into a comfortable irrelevance.
That's the unsettling possibility they raise. The irony being that the tech enabling the initial problem, the pill enabling the sexual revolution's consequences, is now superseded by a new tech, AI and blockchain, acting as this involuntary systemic solution. Hashtag outro. So just to wrap this up, let's restate that central, really provocative paradox one last time for you listening. The argument is the sexual revolution, powered by technology like the pill, inadvertently created this crisis of competence, this demographic slide towards the Idiocracy prophecy.
Right.
And now, a different kind of technology, AI, blockchain, automation, is emerging, almost like an immune response, poised to repair the damage by simply deleting the bloat, wiping out the dubious disciplines, the jobs, the entire economic structure is built primarily on human validation and ego, because AI doesn't need any of that.
Yeah, and that whole conversation we always hear about AI ending capitalism, the sources say that's missing the real story. It confuses capitalism-free exchange, competence finding its level, with the bloated validation economy we've built on top of it.
Exactly. If AI, like this conceptual auto-Karen, just ruthlessly optimizes for competence and deletes the jobs that exist merely to affirm egos, what happens then? Society might be forced to look in the mirror and admit that huge parts of our economy, huge amounts of work, weren't about creating real value. They were about managing feelings, signaling status, pursuing validation.
Pursuing things AI has absolutely no use for.
None. So AI doesn't just make things more efficient. It potentially destroys the entire need for the serpent's game, for the feel-good lies, and all the bureaucracy that supports it. It could force humanity back to confronting reality, competence, and maybe, just maybe, purpose.
And if the machine takes over the validation jobs, maybe that frees up the human time, the resources, the capital that's been locked up in that system, potentially making family life affordable and desirable again. Solving the demographic crisis is a side effect of optimizing for competence.
That's the hope embedded in this analysis.
Yeah.
So the final thought, the question you have to wrestle with is, are we as a society ready to accept a technology, a force, that might dismantle the comfortable illusions, the validation structures we've built? Even if that dismantling, that return to competence, is maybe the only path left to securing our own future.